Hey guys, Comet here. Welcome to episode 25 in my Overly Scienced series. Now it's been a while since I've added a video to this series. I haven't had much reason, seeing as how I lost the old map. But I think I've come across a good opportunity when it comes to explaining some solar mechanics in the game. Now, this video is prompted by a comment from Esven, who points out the problem with my, shall we say, naive approach to calculating solar efficiency in my last spaced out video. So I will pin this comment. There's really good explanations in here in case you're interested in seeing this. And there's also some good information in my Discord. So if you're interested in that, then there's a link in the description. Just make sure you click the little thumbs up when you enter the welcome page to get access to the entire server. So I will try to explain everything in here that has to do with power production via solar panels, and then I'll also go over what that means for storing that extra power using batteries. Now, there's been several videos and I think a Reddit post about this already, so I'm pretty sure this is common knowledge by now, but if you hide 3 tiles of a solar panel in this kind of pyramid formation here, then you can get more power per horizontal space because you can more efficiently capture the lux, as opposed to this flat setup here. And so I'll quickly go over this graph here that Esven provided. The majority of this video wouldn't be possible without them, so special thanks to Esven. Without getting too deep into the math quite yet, the way you'd read this graph, so this orange section here is the power output of just the flat setup like this. Then if you hide 1 tile of the solar panel, you add on this green section here, so you get a little bit more power. Then if you hide 2 tiles, you'd then end up with this orange section, but it's still capped, which means there's still some lux that's being wasted. You don't fully capture all of the lux until you hide the 3rd tile, and then there's no more extra lux to capture, so that's this added blue section. And so that's why you only want to hide the 3 tiles. If you go more than that, then you're not actually getting anything out of it. And this happens because the maximum power output on the solar panels is only 380 watts. So it is proportional to the amount of lux, but only to a certain point, where it's then capped at 380. Now, if we look at these panels over here, they can never actually reach 380 watts, so they're never capped, which means they're always converting all of the lux into power. And for the average player, that's pretty much the extent of what you need to know, other than how much power storage you need with each setup. So if you do just this flat setup, then you'll need 2 smart batteries per panel if you don't want to run out of power during the low times. And if you're using the most efficient setup here, where you're hiding 3 of the tiles, then you'll only need 1 2/3 of a battery per panel. Now, being the science series, just me telling you the answer would be boring. So we're going to get into some calculus to figure out why these are the answers. So the first thing we can calculate, that's, I think, the simplest place to start, is the power ratio on the solar panel. So what I mean by that is how many watts the panel will produce per the lux that's hitting it, and then what we can do is multiply by the then lux at that time in order to get some power output. So we know that the max output on a panel is 380 watts. Now we need to know how many lux it takes to produce this 380 watts. And we can double check that on the wiki here, and it says that it's 50,000 on each tile. And we have to remember that each panel has 7 tiles. So that's a total of 350,000 lux per panel. So we can use that number here, 350,000 lux, and this is actually the solar panel constant. This is the ratio that every solar panel will be using. Then if we multiply this by how much lux is hitting the panel, we should get some power output, because these units will reduce, and we'll be left with watts. But this actually isn't quite correct yet, because this is lux per tile, because it only gives us, right, this one vertical column here. So if we have the amount of lux, then we would need to multiply by how many tiles are exposed in order to get this bottom unit here to reduce. And so let's say we're doing this basic setup where all 7 tiles are exposed, then we can multiply by the 7 tiles. And then that will give us the power output. And so these will reduce, and we're just left with watts. And so this entire equation now is only dependent on this variable L. So we can do a similar setup. Let's call this one P sub 7. And we could do a similar setup here for the pyramid structure. And instead of this being a 7 here, it would be a 4. So deriving L is a little trickier. But going back to the wiki, we can see that the lux actually follows a sine wave with a half period of 0.87. Now, what that means is that from 0 to 0.875, or 87.5% of the way through a cycle, there will be some amount of lux, and then after that point, there's no more lux until the next cycle starts. But in order to get the entire sine wave, right, sine waves, they go like this. And so from here to here, that captures the entire sine wave, but we're only interested in this half part of it, which is the 0.875. And so in order to get the entire sine wave, we'd have to multiply it by 2. And so that's where we get this 1.75 for the entire sine wave. And then there's one last piece of information we need, and that is the maximum lux possible. That will give us the magnitude of this sine wave, and it looks like it is 80,000. So we can say that the lux at any given time is equal to 80,000 times, then we need to introduce the sine function. So this is where our variable time is introduced. Now an entire sine wave, as you go through the y values of the circle, in order to go all the way around the circle, it's 2 pi. And so the sine wave is just giving you the y value of the point on the circle as you go around it. And we want the entire sine wave, so we need to go 2 pi radians. So times 2 pi over, now we need to normalize it to this number here. So we can just do this. And we're only interested in this function when t goes from 0 to this number here. So 0.875. Now this doesn't actually give us the entire story, right? Because there's that little bit of the cycle that we're not including. So at that point, we know that lux is just 0 when t goes from 0.875 all the way to 1. And then that will start the next cycle, which will just use this again. So now we have our 2 equations, and we can start taking some integrals to get the total power output of the solar panels. Now, a quick refresher, an integral, let's say we have some curve here. An integral, if you do some bounds on it, like from here to here, all it tells you is the area under this curve. So if we can graph a function of the output, so that would be the y-axis here, so that would be power, and then on the x-axis, that'd be time. Then if we take the sum of every instance of time, then that should give the total power output over the course of 1 cycle. Now, the easier one to calculate, or I guess it's not really easier, it's just a little prettier, is this pyramid setup. So we want to take the integral from 0 to 0.875 of our original function we calculated here with the substitute in for L. So we need the solar panel constant, which is 380 over 350,000, now times everything we came up with for L, which is 80,000, times the sine of 2t pi over 1.75. And this will give us a curve that looks something like this. So we can see at maximum here, almost halfway through a cycle, the power produced per tile of the pyramid stack should be about 90 watts. But we're not really interested in the peak per tile, we're interested in the average. And so Wolfram Alpha, for some reason, didn't actually solve this integral. So I just plugged it into this integral calculator. And that actually reminds me, I screwed up here. This is with respects to t. So I'm not really interested in any of the math, but this is the answer we're looking for. So what this is saying is, over the course of one cycle, we should expect an average of 48.4 watts per tile. So we can write that in over here, and this is still per tile, not per panel. Now, we can do something similar for the flat setup, although it's not quite as elegant. Integrals are kind of cool with how you can actually just distribute the function. So what we can do for the flat setup, actually, is take 3 separate integrals and then add them all together. So if we look at just the integral from 0 to the time where the solar panels max out, which happens at this point in the cycle, then we can use this same function up here. So we have the solar panel constant times then the sine function with respects to t. We can add this then to the maxed out portion, which we know is just the max wattage, or the 380. Now we have to remember that this is all per tile, and there's 7 tiles in a solar panel. So we have to divide that by 7. And this happens from this point over here to a symmetrically opposite point on the decline. And so that happens at this point here. And if we want just the time where we're using this, then we can subtract the destination from the starting point to get the total time that we're running on max. And because it's symmetrical, we can actually multiply this integral by 2. And so this, when you plug it into Wolfram Alpha, looks something like this. So we can see the power increases as the lux increases, and then the solar panels are capped, and then it starts decreasing again as the lux decreases. So if I paste in just this first portion of the graph, and this is with respects to t, from 0 to 0.188, then we get this tiny little number here of just 5.3. So we can multiply that by 2. So times 5.3, right? This is the integral from above. Now plus, now because we're finding area, you can think about it geometrically like this, or I think to actually get it to work on the integral calculator, if we do something like this with respects to t, even though this is just a constant, we get approximately 27. So a plus now, this over here, which is 27, equals, now all we need for this is a calculator, 5.3 times 2 plus 27. And that gives us 37.6 watts per tile. And so to truly do a efficiency calculation here, as opposed to what I did in the most recent spaced out video, we would need to take the 48.4 and subtract the 37.6, and then divide everything by the 37.6, and multiply by 100 to get it in a percentage, and it comes out to about 28.7%. So this is the true increased efficiency, and not the 55.5 that I got in the other video. So this 55.5, where does this come from? This only comes from the difference between this flat line here and this extra blue curve on top, which isn't entirely correct. And so if you're curious as to why hiding the 3 tiles only is the best, then you can go through and take the integrals of hiding 1 tile, 2 tile, and 3 tiles, and then you'll see that hiding 4 tiles gives you the greatest number here at the end. So that is everything you need to know to figure out the best solar panel setup, but solar panels, they stop working during the night. So they're really only useful if you use them in conjunction with batteries. Now, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you're using just the flat solar panel setup, then you need about 2 batteries per panel, at least 2 smart batteries. It would be 1 jumbo battery per panel. And if you're using this pyramid setup, then you'd need about 1 2/3 of a smart battery. So how are those calculated? Well, if we go back to our original equations here, so we've already decided we're going to be using the most efficient setup, which is hiding 3 tiles, and that gives us a power output curve like this, and we know that every cycle, each tile will produce 48.4 watts, and so this is the theoretical safe draw from the solar panels. And so if we put this rate into this equation as a negative number, then essentially we can just shift this graph down by the safe draw, and everything above that is the power we need to store. And when we do that, so it's just the old equation minus the safe draw, we're taking the integral of that, and we're only interested in the positive sections, and that happens between t equals 0.163 and 0.71. So taking an integral of this function now would look like this, and it gives us about 13.76 watts per tile that we need to store. So the 13.76 watts per tile is the excess power that we can't actually use until the panels stop producing power. And so this, we need to get it into joules, and joules are just watts times seconds, and there's 600 seconds in a cycle. And actually, I think this would be more clear if I did it this way. So if we multiply this by the 600 seconds that are in a cycle, then we get about 8,256 joules per tile. So you can calculate it this way, or you can calculate it using the number of panels, and each panel has 4 tiles. So if we take this number, 8,256 joules per tile, times then the 4 tiles that are in each panel, because we're hiding 3, then you end up with 33,000 joules, or you can convert this to kilojoules. And since each battery can only hold 20, we can divide this by 20 kilojoules, and you can see that we need about 1.65 batteries. And so I just round this up to be 1 2/3 of a battery. So now that we've done all the math, we can go ahead and do some tests here to see if we're even remotely close. So all of these batteries are dead, and we know that the safe draw on the pyramid system per tile is 48.4 watts, and we have 28 tiles exposed to the light. So if we do 28 times 48.4, then we can safely draw from that solar setup 1.35 kilowatts. And if we have 1 2/3 battery per panel, then we should never run out of power. So if we look at the draw on this wire, it's 0. If I connect up this aquatuner and the refrigerator, potential load is 1.32. That's not quite enough. So I have these lights here, and it gets us all the way to 1.35. And I don't know of anything that only takes 5 watts of power, so I think that's as close as we can get. But we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panels. So if we do 7 times 1.66, we should only need 12 batteries. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We don't need these 2. So I'll let this run through a couple of cycles, And you can see the power level on the batteries as we go through. So it does look like there's brief moments where we run out of power, and I think that has to do with the power leak of 400 joules per cycle, and that is per battery. So if we want to take that into consideration, then we would do that by first calculating how many batteries we need per tile. So we need to use this number up here. So 8,256 joules per tile is what we need to store. And I'm actually just gonna convert this to kilojoules. I trust everyone can follow that. Now each battery can store 20 kilojoules, and each battery will leak 400 joules in one cycle, and there are 600 seconds in one cycle. And then once we divide joules by seconds, that should give us a unit of watts. And after all of the units reduce out and we multiply and divide all across, we end up with 0.27 watts per tile that we lose because of the batteries required to store the extra power. So if we go back to this number here, so 48.4 minus 0.28, the safe draw per tile is really only 48.12. And to give a margin of error, I'll round that down to 48. So 48 times the 28 tiles that are exposed to sunlight gives us a safe draw, once the batteries are taken into consideration, of 1,344. So let's try this now. There's 1.34 potential load, and we'll see if this gets us a little bit closer. So the batteries are getting really low. So it looks like we run out of power twice before the panels catch back up. So if I remove one more light here, I don't think we should ever run out of power now. It's getting really low again. And we lose power for a couple of seconds there. But then it tries, and it doesn't lose power again. Okay. So it looks like all of our calculations have gotten us extremely close to perfection here. So it looks like the safe draw is 1.33. And if we kind of reverse engineer this, 1.33 kilowatts divided by the 28 tiles that are exposed, it looks like the safe draw is actually closer to about 47.5. So let me recap everything we've gone over. The most straightforward way of laying out solar panels is not the best way. It's better to hide some of the tiles underneath other solar panels so you can more efficiently capture lux. And the number of tiles you want to hide is 3. No more and no less if you want to be the most efficient about it. And if you do set it up in this structure, then you can safely draw about 47 watts per tile of your pyramid to never drain your batteries down to 0. Now, how many batteries do you need per tile? Well, we can use this number right here, divide that by 20. You'll need about 0.4 of a battery per tile. So I've gone ahead and wrote out all of the important takeaways of this video. You want to hide 3 tiles of each panel, and when you do that, you construct a panel pyramid where you can safely draw 47 watts per tile of that pyramid. Actually, I should specify per horizontal tile of the pyramid. And you need 0.4128 batteries per horizontal tile of the pyramid. And in case you don't actually want to do the pyramid structure, then I can go over the numbers of just the flat setup like this, but there's no math behind that. You'll have to just take my word. You can only draw about 36 watts per tile, and you'll need about 0.3 batteries per horizontal tile of the flat setup, which works out to be almost 2 batteries per panel. So you can use these numbers to calculate the power output of your setup and how many batteries you'll need. I'd once again like to give special thanks to Esven for making this video possible, and if you'd like to see more content like this, then consider subscribing. But anyway, I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.